words of power because we are kings and our words matter. You're never told to drink the blood. You're told only to drink the substitute, which stood as a symbol for the blood. Jesus took the wine cup, no blood in it. He says, this is the blood. This is my blood, which is shed for you, he says. In other words, think of it as my blood and drink it and partake of me, partake of my life, partake of my spiritual life, partake of what I am.
Tukifika mbinguni tutaimba wimbo wa ajabu hujawahi sikia. Tutapiga zezewe na vinubi pia nazo tarumbeta, wimbo wa ajabu. Hakuna giza pale Bwana ndo ameamwanga hakuna kula kwa jasho wala kuzaa kwa uchungu. Ni furaha kuu kula, kucheza na kuimba wimbo wa ajabu hujawahi sikia.
Sam Cheladurai invites you to a special pastor seminar at AFT Chennai on the 20th, 21st and 22nd of January 2016 from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Please note that all messages will be in Tamil only. Prior registration with a fee of Rs 700 is required. You can register online at www.revsam.org or you can call us at the numbers on the screen. We look forward to seeing you there.
Let's turn to Matthew chapter 26 and let me read to you from verse 26 to 28. As they were eating, Jesus took bread and blessed it and brake it and gave it to the disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." And he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, "Drink ye all of it, for this is my blood of the New Testament or New Covenant, which is shed for many for the remission of sins." Now, this is talking about the Lord's table. There is something about the Lord's table that a lot of people do not understand. We do observe the Lord's table. We respect it as a Christian ritual and we observe it. But have you ever thought about this? Christianity has very few rituals, actually only 2 rituals. Christianity is not about rituals. It's all about inward things. Only 2 external rituals, and that is, one is the water baptism and the other is the Lord's Supper, all right? The communion, the Holy Communion that we observe. Among the 2, one is only done once, even though some people do it very often. The baptism is meant to be done only once, all right? If you believe and you're baptized, that's good enough. That baptism is valid enough. You don't have to be taking it every month. You don't have to be taking it every year. Don't have to be taking it in every church that you go to. Suppose you go to a different town and different church, you don't have to take another baptism. Not necessary. You've believed and received baptism in water. That is good enough. So that is something that is basically done once in your lifetime. It is never repeated. But the Lord's Supper, strangely, we are told to do it as often as we can in remembrance of Him. Have you ever thought about it? It must be very important, I think. There must be a great significance to it, and that is why we are told to observe it. And we are told to observe it repeatedly as often as we can. And as we do it in remembrance of Him and the cross of Calvary and what happened there, it seems. And Jesus, in talking about it, says in another place. He says, if anybody, he says, verily, verily, I say unto you, except ye eat of the flesh of the Son of Man, he says in John chapter 6, except ye eat of the flesh of the Son of Man and drink of the blood, or drink of His blood, you have not life in yourself. These are statements I think is very difficult for Christian people to understand. You eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink the blood, or drink His blood. You have no life in yourself. And Jesus, when He broke the bread and gave it, He said, this is my body. And when He took the cup and gave it, He said, this is my blood, which is shed for the remission of the sins of many. This is the blood of the new covenant, He said. What does He mean by that? What is this ordinance all about? What is this thing? Why is it we are told that we should repeat it again and again, and we should remember the Lord's death through this and so on? Now, the whole thing, it seems like to me, is based on what is called the blood covenant. One of the oldest covenants that have been around among humankind, the blood covenant. History shows that blood covenant has been practiced by all primitive peoples everywhere from time immemorial. It's been done from the beginning. It must have been. It must have started in the Garden of Eden itself by God Himself, and it has been continued by all kinds of people. That is why the primitive peoples everywhere continue to practice it. People that live in forests, in places where man cannot reach them, missionaries have not gone there, civilization has not gone there, nobody from the outside world had gone and infiltrated them with their teachings and so on. Still, those people believe one thing: they believe in a blood covenant. They consider a blood covenant to be very sacred. And the blood covenant lifts them from, even if they're cannibals, even if they are living such a low life, it lifts them to a different level, it seems like. They become all of a sudden truthful to one another because it's a covenant brother. They have made a blood covenant with that person. Blood covenant is a concept that is divine. It seems to have its origin in God. God must have been the originator of it, because there is something very holy and very special about it. That blood covenant is never broken and never violated. And when two people are in a blood covenant, they are really brothers. And they never go against one another. They never turn against one another. They never do anything against one another. It turns people into something good, So it must have a very divine origin. Now let me give you some background about the blood covenant, because then only we will understand the new covenant. The new covenant is based on the blood covenant, because the new covenant is also a blood covenant. Jesus said, this is my blood that was shed for you. So the new covenant is a blood covenant basically. Without understanding the blood covenant and the practice of the blood covenant over the years and what it meant to the people, you cannot really understand what the new covenant is and what it means for us today. We will look at some biblical examples also, but I want to go through history today. And I want to cover certain basic facts about the blood covenant. The reason for cutting the covenant historically has been basically three reasons. One is for safety or preservation, they made a blood covenant. A smaller tribe living near a bigger tribe always felt threatened that the bigger tribe may sometimes come and enslave them. So they were always under the threat of the bigger tribe coming and overwhelming them because of their bigness, just by sheer number. they are beaten. So they often went to the bigger tribe before anything happened. They went to the bigger tribe and they struck a covenant with them. And they said, well, we are weak because we are very few in number. We don't want any intrusion from you. We don't want you to take advantage of that. Let's be brothers. Let's love one another. Let's join hands with one another. Let's live together peacefully. So they made a covenant. And so the first reason was for preservation, for safety, they made blood covenants. The blood covenant always meant that it involved cutting a part of your body, making an incision where blood flows. The word covenant in the Hebrew language literally means to cut until blood flows. That's what the word means. The word covenant means. It's not just signing a paper. It's not just signing a document. It's cutting a part of your body until blood flows. So that is how they made the covenant, and I'll talk about it a little more later. So the second reason, the first reason is for safety. Smaller tribes went to the bigger tribes for safety's sake, for preservation, and they made a covenant. Second reason is when two men are involved in business as partners, it's very easy for one man to cheat the other and take advantage of the other by some way or the other. Suppose one has to stay in town and mind the business and the other has to travel for the sake of business. All kinds of things can go on in town where the one guy stays and takes care of business. He can really cheat him out of all of his profit and so on. So when the guy travels, he's always afraid what is happening over there in the office, what is happening over there back in his business. So in order to get rid of that fear, in order to make sure things are all right, they entered into a blood covenant, because when you enter into a blood covenant, you never violate it. A person who violates it is considered cursed. The ground he stands upon is cursed. Even his relatives will turn him over to be killed, because to violate a blood covenant was a very serious business in those days. So they trusted in the blood covenant to keep the business relationship good. So the two businessmen, in order to make sure that one does not cheat on the other, they made a blood covenant. They made a blood covenant so that they will stick together, they will do the business together, be sincere to one another, and not cheat on one another. Thirdly, if two people loved one another, they made a blood covenant. Like Jonathan and David, for example. We'll study that in the weeks to come. A wonderful example from the Bible where Jonathan and David make a covenant because of their love for one another. They were devoted in love for one another. They made a covenant. So for love's sake, they made a covenant. So for safety's sake, first of all. Secondly, businessmen entering into partnership with each other cut the covenant to ensure that neither would take advantage of the other. Thirdly, for the sake of love, people made the blood covenant. There was a method to cutting the covenant. Let me talk about these things in order to really get into the blood covenant, the new covenant, and what it means for us. We need to talk this background first. The cutting of the covenant, was practically same all over the world with some minor differences in procedure. In some places, it was degenerated. It has degenerated into a very grotesque and almost a horrible rite, which is ungodly. They started drinking blood and so on as part of the covenant, which God never approves. I'll show you that. But the cutting of the covenant and the sacredness of the covenant and the promises that are made in the covenant and how wonderfully it is kept must be noticed. Even though there are some diversions, there are some religions and some people that have taken it and made it, twisted it and turned it into something grotesque and all of that, something unacceptable by God. But basically, blood covenant involved this. The two men, when they wanted to make a blood covenant, they came together bringing a priest. First, there was an exchange of gifts between them. The exchange of gifts meant that they gave the best that they could give to one another, indicating that everything, they're saying this to the other man, to the covenant partner, everything that I have hereafter belongs to you, and everything that you have hereafter belongs to me. This gift is a token of that. I'm giving you this to show you that everything that I have belongs to you, and he also gives the gift to show, to indicate that everything belongs to him. Even though they never went to one another and asked for anything, they did this as a symbol of that. The fact that anytime if they needed it, they can indeed do that. After they exchanged gifts, there was the cutting of the covenant, where literally their wrists, in the wrist area, there was an incision made until blood flowed out of the wrist. And then in places like Africa and the Arab countries, what they did was they took certain drops of blood from that wrist and let it drop into a glass of wine. They did the same thing to the other fellow, the covenant partner. They cut his wrist and let the blood flow. And some drops of blood were dropped into the same cup. So the two bloods mingled. They mixed the two bloods and they gave them to drink it. The Bible never approves us to drink blood. I want to say it at the outset. This is a twisted and turned form of blood covenant. I don't think God, when he instituted it, he ever meant for blood to be drunk or blood to be eaten. Let me just read to you a couple of verses, because I don't want any of you going home today and cutting a blood covenant and dropping a couple of drops of blood in a wine glass and drinking it, saying, Pastor Sam said this is the blood covenant, it has been twisted and turned in a bad way. That is why I think Christians have rejected the idea of blood covenant as something that is heathen practice. During the time of Augustine, for example, he did away with the very idea of the blood covenant and all of these things, and the phylacteries that they wore with the promises of the blood covenant written in them and so on. This was a wonderful practice, but he got rid of it because of certain features like this. The fact that they did certain things wrong, he thought that it was a heathen practice. And the church basically rejected it, thereby, in their minds, completely rejecting the idea of the blood covenant. And because of that, today they cannot understand the cross of Calvary. They cannot understand the new covenant. If you don't understand the blood covenant, you won't understand the new covenant. There are some tribes and some people may have taken and twisted it and turned it into something grotesque. It doesn't matter. Let's go back and look at it in its purest form and understand it. So let me read from Genesis chapter 9. Let me read to you verse 3 and 5. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you, even as the green herb I have given you all things. But flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall you not eat. And surely your blood of your lives will I require, at the hand of every beast will I require it. And at the hand of a man, and at the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of man. Very clearly God says, the flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof. Which means the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I don't want you to be eating it or drinking it, because the life of the flesh, the physical life, is in the blood. All right? Turn to Leviticus chapter 17. There is a very clear scripture there. Leviticus chapter 17. Let me read to you verse 10 and 11. And whatsoever man there be of the house of Israel, or of the strangers that sojourn among you, that eateth any manner of blood, I will even set my face against that soul that eateth blood, and I will cut him off from among the people. See, God is very much against this thing about consuming blood. I'll cut him off from among his people, he says. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I've given it to you upon the altar to make an atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that maketh an atonement for the soul. You can shed the blood to make an atonement for your soul. It can be shed in an altar. It can make an atonement for souls, but you cannot consume it. You cannot drink it. You cannot eat it, and so on. The Bible is very clear about it. Because the life of the flesh is in the blood. See, the thing is so real. That is why many people from the ancient tribes, they used to drink the blood of certain animals. For example, they believed that if you drank the blood of a ox or a rhinoceros, you will somehow get the life, the strength, and the power that is there in an ox or a rhinoceros into yourself. Because the life of that ox is in that blood. So when you drink that blood, they believed that they can receive that strength. Such beliefs were there, so they literally drank the blood, And when Jesus took the cup and said, "This is my blood of the new covenant which is shed for you, drink ye it," he means to say, partake in my life, in all that I am. This is a symbol. See, the Bible always, allows you to use only the symbol, the grape juice or the wine, as a substitute for the blood, never the blood. You're never told to drink the blood. You're told only to drink the substitute, which stood as a symbol for the blood. Jesus took the wine cup, no blood in it. He says, "This is the blood. This is my blood, which is shed for you," he says. In other words, think of it as my blood and drink it and partake of me, partake of my life, partake of my spiritual life, partake of what I am. Just like a man believes if he drank the blood of an ox, he'll become strong like an ox. You believe that by partaking of me, you'll become like me. Partake of me, he says. So the Bible never recommends drinking of blood and so on. But they practiced it in that way. Some tribes practiced it in that way. They drank the blood, and then they, after they're drinking the blood, they shook hands. And the shaking of hands today is like, this is your hand and this is my hand. We bring it together and we just shake it, right? Then there in those days, they took the hand and brought the wrist and wrist together so that the bloods mingled. This is how they shook their hands. I would go and shake your hands, go deep into your hands so that my wrist touches your wrist. That's the way they shook their hands, because they wanted the bloods to mingle. And this was also important to them, and they became blood brothers. From that time, they became blood brothers. It meant a lot to them. It meant that they cannot turn against each other. They cannot do anything against one another. They cannot cheat one another. You see, it was a covenant. It was a blood covenant, you see. It was a blood covenant. The cup which was filled with their blood, they drank. And when they drank it, it meant to them that they have partaken of one another and they become one with the other, so that if they do something against the other, they are doing it against themselves. That's the way they thought about it, you see. Even today, sometimes you find in the wedding ceremonies, they have communion. And have you ever wondered why they have communion? Some people think it's just a tradition in some churches that they have communion. But it has a meaning. What they're saying is that the wedding is not just a legal thing, where by the law of the state, you're joined together as husband and wife with two witnesses and you signing. Two witnesses and you signing satisfies the law of the state. You become husband and wife. But the wedding in the eyes of God is much more than that. It is a covenant. It is not just a legal contract. It is a covenant. Because it is a covenant, they ask you to lift the cup together. They ask you to take the bread and eat it together and lift the cup together, because you are not only just becoming partners together in a legal contract, you are bound together by a covenant which cannot be broken. A blood covenant that was put into effect by the cross of Calvary through Jesus Christ. And you take the cup that signifies that blood covenant, and you say, "I enter into a covenant like that with you." Now, then there is no place for separation, no place for divorce, no place to say, "You go to your mother's house and I'll go to my mother's house," and all that nonsense, Once you do that, you're bound by a covenant. Whether you like or not, you stay together. and better start liking one another and working out things with one another and do something to make it work. There is no way out because it is a covenant relationship. It is like a blood covenant.
Blessing and honor, glory and power, into the ancient of days. From every nation, all of creation, bow before the ancient of days. Every tongue in heaven and earth shall declare your glory. Every knee shall bow at your throne and worship you. Be exalted, O God, and your kingdom shall not pass away, O ancient of days. Blessing and honor, glory and power, be to the ancient of days. From every nation, all of creation, bow before the ancient of days. Every tongue in heaven and earth shall declare your glory. Every knee shall bow at your throne and worship you. Be exalted, O God, and your kingdom shall not pass away. Every tongue in heaven and earth shall declare your glory. Every knee shall bow at your throne and worship you. Be exalted, O God, and your kingdom shall not pass away, O ancient of days. Just clap our hands. The Bible says his kingdom will reign over all the earth forever and ever. Sing that now. Your kingdom shall reign over all the earth. Sing to the ancient of days. For none can compare to your matchless worth. Sing to the ancient of days. Every tongue in heaven and earth shall declare your glory. Every knee shall bow at your throne and worship you. Be exalted, O God, and your kingdom shall not pass away.